Um, so my name is James Kotecki, and by day I am the Vice President for Marketing and Communications at a machine learning company in Raleigh, North Carolina called Infinia ML. And I have been not associated with, but I moderated a panel at the Schema Business School campus in Raleigh on the campus of NC State University back in February. It was one of the last normal things that I actually did before COVID-19 locked us all down. And so I'm happy to still continue my affiliation with that school as part of this larger conference with students from all over the place and other schools as well, and moderating this panel. I'm so thrilled to discuss the big questions of AI, the kind of unanswerable questions of AI, the questions that get really smart people in the field to have very strong disagreements with each other. Those are some of the questions that we talked about at that panel in February. Those are some of the questions that I wrestle with when I'm interviewing guests on my podcast, which is called Machine Meets World. And those are some of the questions that we're going to talk about right now. So a couple of ground rules. This is, so far we have 13 participants in this session. I believe the session is being recorded by several folks. So if you don't want to be recorded, please don't turn your mic or your camera on. And I expect other people may be coming into this session as we go on. The idea with this session is that some people were kind of selected to be student panelists. So imagine that we were in person on a stage and I had 10 students or however many students on stage with me that I was asking questions to as kind of the main discussion. But of course, we want everybody to be involved. So the way this is going to work is if your camera is on, I'm assuming that you are, quote, on stage with me. So you actually want to really be involved in the conversation. You're on stage with me and that you expected to do that in this session. If your camera is off, you're still open to participate. So if you've got a question, type it into the chat box. If you'd rather verbalize your question, I believe I have the power, and Hanna-Marie, I think you also have the power to unmute folks. Maybe you can even unmute yourself, I'm not sure. But if you have other questions throughout the session, raise your hand digitally by pressing the raise hand button or type it into the chat. So we've all done Zooms a million times, so hopefully everybody's familiar with this, but got to give the spiel before every single one of them. So everybody good? Any kind of logistical questions on how this is going to flow? And I think we're going to go until 1 p.m. Eastern time. So until the top of the next hour. So I'll pause there. Any logistical questions or questions on what this is, or if you think you're in the wrong place, just feel free to go to another Zoom. Everybody good? Okay, and welcome to those who are just joining us. We're going to get started. So I see that there are currently 9 people who have turned their cameras on. So I will, everybody who's got their camera on, I will, let's start with a warm-up, like introductory question. Just say who you are and I'll call on you so that you know which order to go in, because I assume everybody's grids look different. And so just say who you are and why you are drawn to this field. So say what your specific specialization is, but obviously this is talking about AI, artificial intelligence generally. So why are you drawn to AI? And I will let my fellow co-hosts, Hanna-Marie, why don't you go first if you're interested?
Sure. Hi. So I'm a student in a master's in France, in La Sorbonne, in creation law and digital. And I'm drawn to AI because it interferes in all strata of society. So on an economic level, every big company is investing in that technology. It also interferes with the democratic process on a political level. It's in our everyday life, in our education, in the way we access culture, in the way we interact with people, with our home, with our environment. And obviously, we could go on and on about the ecological impact of AI. Sorry. And so we can't deny to AI the place it has taken in our lives. We can't deny its benefits and its numerous applications. But we also can't deny that it has risks and that it needs to be regulated. And that's this regulation that I'm interested in. the idea that AI is the catalyst for so much money and so much power over our lives and over our relationships, and with everything that surrounds us, that we need to be aware of its risks and to understand and try to limit them. And that process of regulation is actually super interesting because the progress in AI is going on unabated. And so we need to find ways to build safeguards around principles that will embrace future evolutions. And that is that specific predictive reflection over prospective issues that is really engaging.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's interesting that you use the term interfere a couple times, which can have a neutral but also a negative connotation. So that'll also be a theme that we bring up today. I think you set the table with a lot of issues quite well. I'm just going to go in order of how I see people in my particular Zoom grid. So if I mispronounce your name, I apologize, but Dorian Redding. You're on mute right now, Dorian. There you go.
Yeah. So hi. So I'm a student at the Sorbonne as well. I just started my PhD on the user of digital services, or more generally, connected services, which also includes, smart speakers, smart watches, etc. And the reason why I'm drawn to AI is because most of these digital services use or implement AI solutions, such as recommendation algorithms or content moderation algorithms. And what I will be studying is the impact of these technologies on the user, like the final user of the services. And I have a special interest in firstly the awareness of the user, his education on how these processes are implemented, and then if we try to go a step further, his empowerment as regards these processes.
Thank you so much. And I'm hearing a lot of bings because a lot of people are joining the room. So if you're just joining us, the people whose cameras are kind of on stage with me if we were doing this live. And so we're going around this student discussion, starting just with a very simple question of who you are and why you are drawn to AI generally. And so the next person that I see is Antoine.
Hi. So for me, I'm a PhD student at the University of Montreal in Quebec. So I'm doing my PhD in bioethics, but my background is more in ecology and management and biology. So why I'm drawn with AI in AI, it's because I really like to think about the bridge that can be made probably between human health, human animals, and maybe also environment. And to do that, it will need like really huge and complex, maybe communication information system. So AI make lots of things possible. So it's for that I'm quite interested in that. But also I'm interested in AI also more because of the intelligent think of AI, maybe the philosophical part in AI, because I find lots of comparison to be made between this concept, the intelligent in AI, because AI it's a thing usually, it's an object, as we can see it in environment. Like there's a lot of objects that are quite intelligent, and there's lots of things or comparison to that we can make between AI ethics and environmental ethics. And I think like both of those fields can learn from the experience of how they manage the governance of their development and their management. So yeah, it's for that I'm drawn and I'm interested to that.
Thank you so much. Now going to Celia.
So, hello, I'm currently a student at Raleigh. I'm in my last year of a bachelor degree, and I'm French. And I'm drawn to AI because I think that because our world is changing with technology, and AI is becoming more and more important. So, what people can be afraid of and discuss and learn about that can help everyone to better understand, use, and live with AI. So also it will allow everyone to like keep a control on its evolution and the unethical drift that could result from it. So it's important.
Thanks so much. Those who are just joining us, we're doing a student roundtable here about the big questions in AI, and we're just going on and getting everyone to introduce themselves and seeing why they're drawn to the field. And for those who are on camera, on stage with me right now, so to speak, I'm going to poll you in a second and ask you if you're kind of more positive or negative on AI generally, just to see where sentiment is. So think about that as the others are answering their questions. We're going to go next to Daniel. Who are you and why are you drawn to AI?
Yeah, thanks very much. And it's really nice to see everyone. So I'm Daniel Schiff. I'm a PhD student in public policy at Georgia Institute of Technology, so here in Atlanta. And I certainly would reiterate what Hanna-Marie and others have said, that AI has these far-reaching impacts and broad impacts across sectors. So education, inequality, economic development. But I think there's something else that kind of captures my attention and the public's attention, and that's this idea of sort of understanding and maybe recreating something about ourselves, meaning the autonomous and intelligent aspects of AI. I think that captures the public imagination in a way that, say, nanotech or biotech or even the internet don't. What does it mean to be intelligent? What does it mean to be alive or human in some sense? Even if we're talking about narrow AI applications, I think these are really profound questions about who we are as individuals and a species, and how we sort of imagine our social contract. So those are the kind of policy and ethics questions that are animating my interest in this area.
Well said. Now we're going to go to Farhan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Farhan. I am currently finishing up my last year as a Master's of Arts and Bioethics student over at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. That's the United States. And so what draws me to AI, I'm going to give you the classic bioethical answer, right? It's all about ethics for me, and it's all about how AI is one of those unique technologies that really lets us look at what our ethical priorities are, right? A lot of other fields are constrained perhaps by physical limitations on what we can or cannot do in that space. But I think with AI, because of how abstract a lot of it is, right? It's presenting on a computer, it's not in person in a real sort of circumstance. It allows us to go a lot farther with, if we want to do deontology, if we want to do duty ethics, if we want to be very utilitarian in the way that we create these kinds of machines, these kinds of models, we can do that, or at least get closer to doing it in a more abstract, a more philosophically true almost aspect. And so that's what really draws me to AI, is this idea that we can get closer to really getting at the core of what A, our society wants us to be in terms of our ethical priorities, and then B, it allows us to really act on those ethical priorities in a way that I think other technologies have come close to, but that AI allows us to do in much greater scope.
I love the different opinions we're getting here, and I'm really excited to see where people disagree with each other, because I think it's going to be some intelligent discussion. We're going to go to Jake now from his at-home library, looks like.
Hello, I'm Jake. I'm in the same program as Farhan at Emory University in Atlanta. My interest is in philosophy of science, and for me, what really does it for me is the path to truth, the path to knowledge that AI opens up. Just the idea that you can have just data sets that are constantly updated, and just through trial and error get to something that's as equivalent to truth as a law of physics. And I'll stop it there. But
that was both the shortest and the most mind-boggling answer, perhaps, because what is truth after all? Let's go to Leo.
Yes, hello everyone. Well, thank you for having us. I guess this is going to be a great conversation. So my name is Leo. Like Celia, I'm also in my fourth year bachelor's, so I'm not a master's, I'm not a PhD student, but hopefully I'll be able to still bring some interesting insight. I'm French born, but I grew up in the US. I was raised in the US. And so I think that's part of where my interest in AI, because my interest in AI for me is rooted in curiosity. For now, I was raised in the Silicon Valley, so I guess unconsciously I was always surrounded by new technologies. And so I think that's where it started. I'm always very interested in AI because I think it can be very controversial. People can be scared of what they don't necessarily know yet, but I think it can be very attractive in many fields. And I think it's good to have a student panel because I think we're all able to see how how education is kind of like shifting towards AI. We have more and more programs that are focused on AI, and I think we're all can all now prepare for jobs that don't necessarily exist yet. So I just think that's really interesting. And as you said, James, in your introduction, it's fascinating. It's a very complex topic. So I'm hoping to gain a lot from this discussion.
Thank you, Leo. And now, last but not least, I'm going to guess Gabriella.
Just Gabrielle, maybe.
Okay, sure. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm a master's student in bioethics. I'm a colleague with Antoine at Université de Montréal, and I work usually on Montreal Declaration for Responsible AI. My answer might be colorful, maybe, but I'm gonna try it anyway. I was drawn to AI first by Kurzweil's singularity theory. And this was brought to me by a music album based on the books, The Age of Spiritual Machines. So those questions of superintelligence first drawn me to AI, all the sci-fi aspect it represents, but I was quickly brought back to reality and realized there was a lot of current and actual issues that needed to be addressed way before we get into those weird sci-fi area. So the current ubiquitous states of AI, the fact that it's everywhere, everyone interact with it, and the opportunity it gives for technological development really excite me as a geek at heart and as a human being. And another weird aspect why I'm drawn to AI is on a more personal and funny note, maybe, I also struggle with the high functioning autism, and finally, I relate to the way AI works, and it draw me to try and understand it better because I feel I understand human nature and myself more and more the more I know about AI. So this is a weird relationship I have with AI so far.
That connects to what I think it was Daniel who said, that this is also a way for us to understand maybe ourselves in a way that other technologies don't. And I also read The Age of Spiritual Machines at a formative age, and it also impacted my decision to eventually wind up in this field. So you are in good company here, and it is a safe place to talk about Ray Kurzweil if you want in this conversation. We can go there if folks would like. All right.
Oh, that's precious.
I would like to first give a little bad news, which is that we are now at 12:20 p.m. Eastern time, which means we have about 40 minutes left in this panel. And so if everybody on this group of 10 of us talks for 4 minutes total over the course of the rest of the session, that will be it. And that will be if we don't have any questions or comments from other people in the audience. So for the rest of this, we got to keep it moving if we want everybody's discussion to be heard. These are questions. I have like 11 questions that all of them could be books, all of them could be courses, all of them could be entire years of study. So don't feel like we have to come up with all the answers, but diversity of thought, disagreement, and passion, I think will be things that are best for this session. Let me start with a poll here. I want to you can just raise your hand, just like physically, just raise your hand because we can see you all on camera. I'm just going to ask a simple question. You can take this however you want. Are you more scared of AI or more excited of AI? I mean, there's reasons to feel both about it, right? But kind of where on the line are you? So if you are more apprehensive, let's say, if you're more apprehensive of AI, let's see if there's a show of hands. Are you more apprehensive than you are excited? One. Are you touching your ear, Gabrielle, or are you raising your hand? Just a hair scratch. Okay. So we have one. Okay. And so the rest of you, are you more excited about AI than you are apprehensive? By show of hands. And how many of you would like to just be in the middle and actually right on the line? Equal parts apprehensive and excited. Okay. When we go to the equal part. Okay. So it seems we have maybe one, maybe two people who are more apprehensive, 3 or 4 people who are more excited, and a lot of people who are somewhere in the middle. And that middle ground is exactly where we want to go. So many ways we could go with this. So for the next questions, not everybody needs to weigh in on everything. So maybe just throw up your hand if you think you have a good answer to this question. What does it mean for AI to be ethical? We heard ethics from several people here. What does it mean for AI to be ethical? Who wants to try that? Farhan.
I'll give you the 30-second answer. I think that it has to be transparent. The way that it comes to a specific answer, it needs to be transparent. And I think that it needs to be easily accessible. So there can't be this monetary or technological barrier to accessing it. I think if you meet those two criteria, you come close to implementing it in an ethical manner.
Dorian. Oh, sorry. Whoever else.
Sorry.
No. Dorian, let's go Dorian first and then.
Okay. Yeah, I completely concur with what Farhan just said. I just want to add that maybe one side of the problem that wasn't mentioned too much today was the data workers and the data trainers, the people that are in the backstage, as it were, of AI training. And I think that ethical AI is about the development and transparency and explainability, but it's also about making sure that it doesn't increase precariousness among the workers or the mechanical Turks. And also, I'm repeating myself about the use of digital services, but also maybe that those that actually participate in AI training. So for example, when we classify an email as spam on Gmail, it helps Google perfect its tool. So maybe the users that do that should be made aware of their contribution in those processes.
We had at least one other person try to chime in there.
Yes,
Celia? Yeah.
Yes, it's me, but I don't know how to raise my hand. But I will say that I will define ethical AI by an AI that serves people without doing so in spite of their liberty or rights, just like serving the people without using them or without negative compensation.
I want to ask maybe Farhan and others this follow-up question. So imagine an AI that is transparent, it is controllable by humans, and it's fully understandable what it does. Just imagine that theoretically. But people could still use that for blatantly unethical reasons, right? If it's just a tool, like a weapon, like a nuclear weapon, right, is theoretically just a tool, or let's just say nuclear physics, right, is a tool for doing things, for splitting the atom, and you can use that tool in different ways for good or bad reasons. So how much of the ethics conversation needs to focus more on human ethics, just having humans do the right thing with this stuff?
I think, if I may go, I can't see everybody else. But,
sure, go ahead, Farhan.
I think to your point, James, I think that's exactly where that lies. Your point about nuclear intelligence, right, or nuclear weapons. We can use nuclear weapons to kill people, or we can use nuclear technology to basically provide power utilization for the planet or for a population. I think it does completely come down to humans policing other humans, humans regulating other humans. I think in a way, AI is no different than any other technology, and it really does come down to us having more robust, more regulatory power to actually regulate this brand new technology. I know we've got a question later on about politics and how that plays into it, and I think that it also does come down to politicians understanding that AI needs to be regulated no different than a lot of other fields where we do have really powerful regulatory tools.
Who agrees that, by show of hands, just physically, just raise your hand. Who agrees that AI is who agrees that AI is not different from other types of technology in that regard? Because there is a sentiment out there, I'm not sure if the people on this panel share it, that AI is somehow fundamentally, qualitatively a different kind of technology. And I think the reason people think that is because they imagine a future of maybe an artificial general intelligence where we're finally creating something smarter than ourselves. So who agrees with the statement that AI is fundamentally the same as other kinds of technologies? I don't mean to put you on the spot, Farhan. Sorry, if it doesn't, hope it doesn't feel like I'm picking on you.
I think only at the extremes. Only when you get to AI having this robust compounding of intelligence where it can be we'll be the slaves. Only when you get to those points do I think it's extremely dissimilar to anything that we have on offer.
So for now, it's similar enough that we should be able to regulate it in the same way.
But I think there's something that we forgot sometime. AI, for sure, technology has other technology, but also if we put it at the sociological level, like the AI have a kind of a weird particularity to be a information process transformation and everything. And that can be something else and other technology have not the possibility to do that, like other AI have the capability of kind of pushing really far discourse in society. And this not the same thing for other technology that we have already. So I don't know if I'm clear about that, but I think we can see AI at the sociological level. And the sociological level, it's kind of a particular technology, I think, that we don't have before.
Gabrielle, were you trying to chime in earlier?
Yes, I was trying, but I was just wanted to double down on it. The fact it's absolutely different from any technology, in my opinion, because it has impact on so many layers. I mean, we basically carry AI in our pockets, around our wrist. It's in our car. It's everywhere, and it doesn't dictate the way we live, but it sure helps. And if it wasn't for AI and many of the technology we have currently, we wouldn't live the same way as we do actually. So it just changed biologically how we live, how we decide to sleep, how we exercise. It just changed everything. So it's not like another technology we just use. It's not something we use, it's something we live with. So it's really different to me.
Oh, Hanna-Marie?
Yeah, I think it's like inherently different from other technologies because it evolves so quickly, and because of the machine learning and deep learning, it has the ability of, well, learning by itself and of developing by itself. And that's why we need special regulations to be implemented dealing with AI compared to other technologies that are like kind of more at the hand of people. This is so unpredictable that it's different from other technologies.
Can I add just a note that I think, so I agree a bit with what you're saying, Farhan, which is, so I listened to a couple of talks in the past 2 weeks. There's a paper out by the US Patent Office and something by the US Military Commission on AI. And they're both asking the same question. Are we just iterating on old regulations, or is this fundamentally transformative? And I think I agree with my colleagues here that sociologically, this is a general purpose technology. It's very transformative. But the US Patent Office and the Military Commission both said, hey, our existing regulations are pretty darn good. We don't need to see AI as a new inventor at this point. It's not a general intelligence. So the fact that they're raising these questions about whether AI will be transformative, I think is different. But I think in the regulatory space, there's maybe a little more of a thought that old regulations just need to be iterated or applied, as opposed to sociologically, it may be more transformative than that.
And this is interesting. I think maybe to weave some of these threads together a little bit more, there's kind of like this, everybody who's on this panel has been drawn to the field of AI and is very passionate about it and has thought quite a bit about it. There's a sense that business leaders and especially regulators and government officials may be so far behind where this panel is right now that a conversation around like, do you need to have some kind of expansive regulation that does something significantly different is not a good conversation to have with those people, because they're so far behind the ball that they just need to understand that they need to be doing something, right? So kind of getting the momentum going in some way. And so it does seem like we're talking about regulation and policymaking. So let's go there now. How many of you, and just again by show of hands, how many of you believe that there needs to be significant government or even international regulation of AI that does not exist today? So I'm not talking about enforcing existing laws, significant new regulation and law and or treaty or whatever about AI. Who believes that's important? See, okay, so maybe two-thirds of the hands went up. Leo, I don't think we've heard from you in a while. How about you kick us off here?
Yeah, well, I think it's important. I think relative to the point people were making in the previous question, especially the point Gabrielle was making about how AI is so much around us in our lives. We do need regulations. I mean, we have to pose the questions. Then are policymakers experts enough? And obviously, I think the simple answer is no, they're not. We can see if for other technologies that they can't be experts on everything. But I think that's why we kind of need to have like committees or experts in AI to weigh in on this, because then you wouldn't have on both ends of the spectrums kind of like extreme regulations, either regulations that are too strict and that prevent the further development of AI, or some that are too loose. But also when we talk about regulations, we need to be careful when do regulations stop and when does freedom kind of start, because it's because AI is something that's going to be every day, all the time with us. I think we need to kind of be careful. And also when we talk about transparency, transparency can mean a lot of things. It can mean that we're capturing data, but then it doesn't necessarily tell us what we're going to do with that data and how we're going to, and everything that's going to happen after. And I think that's really the issue.
I'll throw another thing into this conversation, which is the context of regulation in three major areas of the world: the US, Europe, and China. So some people see it that, on one extreme is China, which is kind of sometimes viewed as the Wild West, where all this data is available because there's lack of privacy restrictions, and China has built, by many accounts, a massive surveillance state using AI to its advantage. On the other side, the perception is that Europe is highly regulatory and maybe isn't doing enough to be innovative because there's so many privacy restrictions, and then the US falls somewhere in the middle. So that's obviously a very oversimplified view of things. But since we do have Europeans and Americans on this panel together, it's an interesting conversation to have. So let's hear from somebody from France, or let's hear from a European on this regulatory issue who wants to chime in. I know Leo said I think you said you were born in France, Leo, but there's an American flag behind you now, so
I was born in France and raised in the US, but I also just came back from 1 year in China. So
okay, cool.
From what I lived in China, it's true that the government uses AI a lot and they've taken it, and whether or not you agree with their tactics, I'm not going to try to get too political here. They've really embraced it. And I mean, we're kind of seeing in AI the kind of new Cold War. With at the top, you have the US and China, and then you have some European countries, Israel. But I think in terms of regulations, yeah, some countries are completely asynchronous in the sense that they have really different views on AI. China is going to use AI and going to implement it and put it on its citizens, whereas I think in European countries and in the US, there may be more of a discussion, and it's not going to be as direct. So yeah.
Can I say something?
I know you had, yeah, go ahead.
I really think the regulations are really, really important on an international level, because people will abuse AI and the technological advantage that it can give them. As long as they're not held accountable, we need explicability on AI as a principle, a major principle. People have to understand why AI make the decisions it make, but it has to be clear for programmers, developers, but people as well in the general population. So as long as anybody isn't held accountable of what AI does to population, we really need regulation to fix it.
Hanna-Marie.
I agree with Gabrielle. I think that in France and in Europe, we have the RGPD and all that protection, data act and stuff like this. And it's very important because we need to hold accountable big tech companies, but also politicians and leaders in general. We can see in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, but everything else, Facebook and WhatsApp and everything that is happening in the world. And if we don't regulate the use of data and collection of data like we do in France, and we need to go even further, there's a big risk that it's gonna get abused and everything.
Is there anyone on this panel who can speak to the technical ability here for whether or not AI can be fully explained and how that would actually work. Because obviously, you can imagine, in just very, very simple terms, you can imagine at some point, let's say we do get to some kind of AGI, something that is actually smarter than humans. We couldn't explain to an ant how our minds work, right? So eventually, maybe you won't be able to explain it, even if you could explain it now. So anybody want to weigh in on the technical ability of explainability?
I'm not sure about the way we can do it, but correct me if I'm wrong, but we can't really have explicability because basically, in general term, AI write his own code at some point. Is that it?
That's part of what I'm getting at, is that AI is sometimes described as a black box. And if you can look inside the black box, you can understand what's going on. But in some cases, I guess some people might have a concern that you are trading off explainability for functionality. So an AI that is fully explainable and that humans can exactly understand what's going on might not be the most effective or the most powerful. And the most powerful thing might be something that is harder for humans to actually understand. Does anyone else think that that is a trade-off that we have to make?
Yeah, I mean, we could have regulation that forces it to only use certain programming languages or rules that are easily understandable to us, but that would be extremely limiting on what actually we get out of it. And it's not as though AI researchers at, say, Facebook or some other Palo Alto campuses right now are really care about what we think. I think enforcing would be very hard, and I think even wording the regulation, I just think we're so far away from some type of policy that would actually do that. So I think it is going to be a black box, in other words.
So the other thing I've been hearing about is our regulatory aspect from the European side, the GDPR, which is amazing, right, in terms of what it's been able to do there. But I will say, because back to your earlier point, James, I think you would ask the question about sort of regulatory and to what degree we implement this. In the States, we have taken a very capitalist approach. We're like, okay, you want to, so if you're Apple, you market yourself based on privacy. If you're Google, you basically market yourself on basically anti-privacy. You are going to take all our data and use it to build this system. The problem here becomes, my understanding is that there are certain websites from the United States which if I try to access, and they're European based, I can't access because the US is not a member of the GDPR, has not implemented similar regulatory protocols. So my point here is that when we're talking about regulation, I really do think that it is important that all the member nations kind of have a UN meeting or some sort of summit and get together and sort out what regulatory aspects on a fundamental level we all want to have. Because I do think that as time progresses, we may be in a situation where there's data the US can access, there's data the EU can access, and because of various differences in the way we've attacked the regulatory aspect of this, that data will be siloed. And I think that goes to making things even more stratified, increasing differences of knowledge within different parts of the world.
Okay, to follow up on that, I kind of disagree about uniform legislation internationally, because, and this is going to sound really cliche, I guess I get one cliche thing, and it's, I think the thing we should be thinking about optimizing is society as a whole. And that's why I like there being different approaches to regulatory policies in different countries, so long as there's a baseline standard of privacy. And I think if we can do that, we have a chance. The problem is it's so hard to pass anything in America that it's not as though optimizing is going to be an option at the legislative level anyways. But that's just my 2 cents.
I want to bring in a few comments from the chat, which people are starting to sound off in, and I appreciate that. From John, some people think proprietary algorithms are even more of a threat than black box AI. And from Paul, it has been my experience in conversation with Google, Microsoft, and others that they are actually very interested in the input of ethicists, as they are struggling with these issues and themselves don't know what the answers are. So thank you for those comments, John and Paul, and others, please feel free to sound off in the comments, ask questions to the panelists, and give us your opinions too, because you too can be part of this conversation. I wonder if there's a concern about the practicability of regulation here too. And I will say it's kind of a cliche thing to say, like, oh, it couldn't possibly be done, therefore we shouldn't do anything. But if we look again at the power, if we all agree that AI is a massively potent force and has potentially destructive ramifications for the world if we don't handle it correctly, we can look back to nuclear treaties, nuclear missiles, and things like that. And somebody mentioned this idea that this is a new Cold War. So let's play that metaphor out a little bit. With nukes, with nuclear missiles, there's a limited number of scientists in the world who actually understand how to make a nuclear missile. It's very difficult to get nuclear fuel and put it together and actually do that. So there is potentially a chance through regulation and legislation and treaty that you can limit some of this stuff. Now, is AI, however, through machine learning and other techniques, progressing so rapidly that regulating it is going to be much more difficult in practice? Because especially with newer techniques that are trying out things like using less training data to actually even be able to learn anything, maybe you don't even need as much data as you thought that you used to. And maybe this is true now, maybe it'll be true in a few years. But nuclear technology, you know, if that evolves on a linear curve, I think we can all agree AI technology seems to be evolving exponentially. So how do you look at regulation given that that is the case?
The bomb had to blow up first, though, before there was any talk of international treaties. And so if the concern is that it's immediately, you know, you go from one day, everything's fine, to the next day we're slaves to this AI overlord. If that's the case, if that's the fear, then there's no chance of getting it prematurely. I just don't think governments act that preemptively.
Anybody with a more optimistic take?
Oh, well, I was going to argue that to Jake's point about the bomb going off, I'm in a very US-centric mode, right? So I can't speak to what the EU has as their bomb act. But for us, it was the 2016 elections, and that level of interference in them propagated by Russia, China, a whole host of bad actors, which used a bit of AI to get that through. A lot of it was just brute force hacking, but there was AI involved. And so afterwards, try as certain administrations might, there were severely more emphasis on data privacy, data security, and looking more at the under the hood, as it were. And I think that the impetus of the states then, therefore, has already kind of happened. We already, by virtue of us having this meeting and talking about it, I think that we are starting to look at how to regulate this and how to examine it. I also think that part of the reason the nuclear technology was so effective is that we regulated it very early on, and we're able to say, we're going to stop you from getting into this exponential evolution curve and kind of hamper you to this linear curve. Now, whether or not you think that that's a good idea or a bad idea in the world of AI is, of course, totally subjective, I think, or at least subject to other interpretation. But I think that's how we were able to get nuclear technology to sort of take a step back and allow us to catch up with it.
There's an element that you touched on, James, if I can follow up on, which is how accessible AI is versus, say, the infrastructure needed to develop nuclear weapons. So just to take one current example, deepfakes, right? So this is an AI-based technology, but becomes more and more accessible to the point that actors with, relatively moderate levels of skill can produce powerful misinformation that has been shown to influence people all around the world and lead to mob violence and undermine political cohesion. So this is something where just banning deepfakes or trying to track them somehow seems just a small part of the puzzle. And we see the need for changing in social norms, social media platform regulation, media literacy and education strategies. So I think understanding what the regulatory consequences are construed broadly is going to be quite a bit more challenging for these kind of low access technologies.
We've got a lot of great ideas on the table here, so I want to make sure that others can weigh in if they have been waiting to. Dorian.
Yeah, I just wanted to give very quickly a lawyer's point of view on regulation and insist on the fact that regulation doesn't mean that we want AI to stop, that we want AI's evolution to stop. And good regulation is actually broad enough and well phrased enough that it can apply several years after it was passed. So I think it's a bit of a common not mistake, but a common danger to associate regulation with anti-technological point of views. That was it. Sorry.
Maybe I want to say something like with also the thing you brought before with the black box and with what you just said about the law. And yeah, I think there's something that is missing, is that it's simply the complexity of AI. And I think like all the framework about complexity can be a great place to look to maybe understand more what is the black box of AI. It's kind of, I think the key word is the wicked problem, and all wicked problem like cannot be really solved by any fixed platform. Like law, I think it's really useful for a large framework to kind of help in many ways, but AI, like many other issues that are like kind of wicked problem that we never had all the puzzle, all the piece to answer to the question and to answers to the issue, need to have kind of really great and multiply mechanism of management to be able to follow them and follow their evolution during the time. And I think there need to be also regulation, but so much other mechanism between the top-down, I will say, approach and the bottom-up approach that make it possible to continually to continue the questioning of AI during the process of its evolution. And that's kind of, I think, something that we should think about.
You guys want to jump in before we go to the next topic? No? Okay, so we've got about 12 minutes left here. And I do want to make sure that we leave enough time for folks to ask questions or engage with our panelists as they like, the people who are in the audience here. I want to end on maybe the biggest question, maybe the kind of question that's kind of looming over this conversation. I've already hinted at it several times, which is this idea of AGI, artificial general intelligence. There are very different opinions on this in the AI community, among very intelligent academics, very intelligent business leaders. Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk famously disagree on this quite significantly. Will we ever get an AI that is smarter than humans? Is a simple way of framing that. There's more technical ways of framing that, or other ways of measuring what that actually might mean. But I think it's good enough for this general conversation to put that out there. And so I want to do another poll of the panelists. And the great thing about having a student panel is that all of you guys are preparing for hopefully very long and successful careers, right? So you can think about through the course of your career in AI, whether this might actually come to pass. And there are, of course, many people who believe that. Ray Kurzweil, of course, what was Ray Kurzweil's year? I think that he said the singularity was 2040. Is that right, Gabrielle?
2029.
2029. So we're getting very close to the predicted singularity from Ray Kurzweil. But just in general, I'm curious, how many of you believe that you will see, and you can define AGI kind of however you want for this purpose, how many of you in your lifetimes believe that you will see the dawn of AGI? By show of hands.
This is just a hopeful hand raise.
A hopeful hand raise. Okay.
This is wishful.
Yeah. So with 4 out of the 9, and so maybe 5. And so let's start with somebody who disagrees that you will not see AGI in your lifetime. Hanna-Marie.
I think there will never be AGI I believe there are 2 types of intelligence. There is the intelligence that you need to perform a task, and then there's one that you need to interact with your surroundings, the emotional intelligence. And to put it like super simply, I just think that artificial intelligence will never be as dumb as humans. They will never be able to be as complex and have the same humor and the same capacity to interact with people and with everything basically as human. And so based on that, I just think that there will never be an AGI.
Strong words. Who's gonna jump in there?
I mean, I say no, but no, not because it's not technically possible, but no, because it's I don't think it's an interesting question. I have human level intelligence and I haven't figured out how to destroy the world just yet. So the real question is, what problems do you want to solve? Will you be able to solve them? And how complex will the programs need to be in order to solve them? I don't think having this weird check mark of AGI, I think it's not a great, even as a metaphor, I don't think it's very helpful.
I kind of agree with that sentiment. Oh, sorry, Gabrielle. I don't think we even need, extreme general intelligence or super intelligence to get worried or very optimistic. Sufficiently powerful narrow intelligence or kind of quasi general intelligence that covers a couple domains at the same time, that's enough to be extremely powerful. So I think that's the kind of benchmark that I'm paying more attention to.
What I'm wondering is, do we have a say in when it will happen, general AI? Because usually when we're talking about this, we're also talking about singularity, and it's the moment when we as humans won't have any impact on the way AI program and develop itself. So is it really up to us to say that it won't happen? Because that's what singularity is about. It's not up to us.
I personally think it'll happen, but it'll creep up on us. And so I think about, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, especially the Next Generation. I think about how all of the processes on the Enterprise in the 24th century are really automated, right? You say the computer to do X, and it doesn't just do Y. It takes all the other intermediate steps and then produces the output that it knew you really wanted. And so I think that's what's going to happen. I think that humans, like it or better for worse, we want to do as least as possible while having enough time to do the things we want to do, right? We don't want to take out the trash. We want to be able to tell the computer, take out the trash for me, put it on the curb, and let it deal with it. My point here is that I think the way AI comes about, the way AGI comes about, is we go and we pursue technology which makes our life easier. And we want it to basically get to the point where it can read our minds, or it can anticipate what we want before we really know what we want. And I think that to talk about this inflection point is to sort of look at the last 20 years and say, okay, the second that the original Mac came out, that was the second computers became accessible. That's not entirely accurate. There was a whole bunch of stuff that happened beforehand to the point where we were able to make accessible components. And so I think it'll happen over time, it'll happen slowly, and one day we'll all wake up and realize, oh, well, I guess we kind of stumbled into AGI just by trying to make our lives easier.
Yeah, I think there was a really good contrast that was made between, when you're talking about AGI, between just intelligence. I think Hanna-Marie made that contrast between emotional intelligence and just pure out intellectual intelligence. And so what I think global intelligence will be probably superior to humans in certain domains. But the way I see it right now, having the ability to show emotions and process emotions, having a relationship based on two-way, I mean, a relationship, and not only replication, imitation, having emotions, intuition, being able to have five senses. That's something that right now I don't even think we can talk about, because right now we're mainly talking about AI really based on replication, imitation, giving it data inside, making it learn from itself, machine learning. So, but I mean, that being said, it's difficult to give a number, right? It's difficult to say, well, we'll achieve AGI by 2029 or by 2040. I might be a bit unexperienced or a bit naive. I mean, if we take how history has I mean, we can basically see that some technologies that we can't take granted today, if you ask them the question 50, 100 years ago, simple technologies, I mean, as Farhan just said, with the computer, you ask people a while ago if that was something that was feasibly possible, they would say no. So I mean, it's difficult to give a number. It's difficult to even know. I think we will see. I think I agree with Farhan. We might just stumble upon it, and it might just be here. But then right now, as of today, with the information that we have, having AGI that's going to be able to process emotions, it's going to be able to build its own emotions, have intuition, and being able to being aware of all the senses, and not necessarily just executing simple orders. I think that's something that right now seems really far away. But then again, you know, it might creep up on us.
If I could take a moment.
Can I ask you a question, maybe? I usually heard the emotional question about the AGI. So is it really when AI will attain some emotional intelligence that we will consider it intelligent? Does it really have anything to do with emotion at large?
I think there's a version of AGI which doesn't require like sentient conscious machines. And getting like conscious machine consciousness is probably a much higher bar. Whereas like emulating emotions might be a little bit easier.
This is where I find this fascinating as a marketer, someone who deals in perceptions and emotions of people and how those are shaped. I think we're going to have many people fooled or tricked into thinking that we have AGI long before we ever do have it, right? I mean, people have full emotional relationships with computer characters and artificial creations right now. People's brains are very easy to hack to believe that, you know, a pet rock is something that you should be looking up to, or that there's shapes in the stars that actually look like shapes. So what the question of AGI from a marketing and perception perspective, I mean, the computer doesn't know or care that it reached some arbitrary threshold of human intelligence. It's all about what people think and how we care about it. And so I think it has large implications, as you guys are talking about, from an emotional perspective, from a perspective of ethically, does it mean we have to now give computers rights? There was a whole episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where Data was put on trial. Is he a man or is he a machine? And so I think these are fascinating questions. And we are now 2 minutes to the end of our session today. We had a relatively impossible task of covering like 11 of the biggest questions in AI ethics and society. And we scratched the surface of a few of them with really smart people. So I think we did okay. Antoine, Celia, I think you guys, and maybe Hanna-Marie, I think maybe we haven't heard from you. Maybe if you have any closing final few second remarks.
Maybe I would like to maybe introduce something else also. There's also the network that can be built with lots of AI that can be scary, like all the things we're starting to know about the Internet of Things and things like that, that can be also really scary when you have EGY by general intelligence, or even a lower one that could be networked with lots of other like that, and also like under smart cities, as can be I think a good subject to think about in other discussion.
Yeah, and just to come back like on artificial general intelligence, I agree like with Hanna-Marie and so some other, because like I will say we can reach like a human level AI or better in some points of the intelligence, but like for the emotion and something like that, I think like we will never reach a point like where the computer will be as much intelligence as us.
All right, well, it is now 1 o'clock by my time and 1 o'clock Eastern time, which means we've been going at it for an hour. And that is our time today. So I want to say thank you to all the student panelists who've been a part of this. Thank you to this conference for inviting me to moderate it. And thank you to all of you who were watching this live. Thank you, everybody. And this, several people have been recording this. So you should be able to check with the conference organizers and see if you can access this recording later, if you'd like to view it. Thank you so much for spending some time today and just scratching the surface of some of these questions. I can tell you're all very passionate and drawn to this for the same reasons that I am, which is that this is maybe one of the most important things any of us will ever think about. And we are alive at the time when it is being developed. So thank you all so much for coming. I am James Kotecki, and I think we just need to click the leave button and we leave. So cheers, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.